She was just a quiet waitress, invisible to everyone, until she discovered a secret in a powerful CEO's contract that could ruin him. What happens next will change both their lives forever. Sit back, relax, and get ready to be amazed by a story of courage, trust, and unexpected love. The sun had not yet risen in Seoul, but the kitchen at Grand Seoul Hotel was already buzzing. Plates clinked, pans sizzled, and in the middle of it all, Maya moved quietly, quickly, and with grace. She wore her hair in a tight bun, her skin warm like golden brown sugar. People barely noticed her. That was fine by her. Being unseen kept her safe. Maya was a waitress, not the loud type, not the kind to gossip or laugh too loudly. She was the kind to smile gently, take your order, serve your food, and disappear before anyone could even ask her name. But Maya noticed everything. She watched how the chef always added too much salt when he was sad. She saw how the bellboy's hands shook whenever the general manager walked in. She noticed when people were happy and when people were pretending. That morning, Maya was cleaning up after a high-profile event. The hotel had hosted a group of business leaders, mostly Korean, some foreign. Their conversations had echoed in the hall all night long, their laughter bouncing off the chandeliers. Maya bent down to pick up a folder someone had left behind on a table. It was thick, full of papers, contracts. She didn't mean to open it, but the folder slipped, papers scattered. Her hand moved fast to gather them. That's when she saw it. Her eyes scanned the words. At first, she froze. Then she read faster. No, this couldn't be right. Maya's hands trembled. She held the paper up to the light, her eyes wide now. Buried in the contract was a clause, one that would take away full control of the CEO's company if he signed it. Her heart thumped. Should she say something? Would anyone believe her? She had no uniform with a name tag. No badge that said lawyer. No voice that carried weight. But she had seen it. And if he signed that paper, he'd lose everything. She didn't wait. Maya folded the paper and held it tight in her palm. Her legs moved fast, faster than her thoughts. She rushed out of the banquet hall, through the quiet lobby, past sleepy guards and staff who didn't even turn to look. She knew she had one chance. The CEO was leaving that morning. She remembered his name from the guest list taped in the kitchen, Daniel Lee. Everyone whispered about him, young, rich, sharp. The kind who didn't smile, didn't forgive, didn't play. She spotted him just as the hotel's black car pulled up outside. He was stepping into it, his assistant beside him. Sir, wait, Maya shouted, out of breath. The bodyguards stepped in first, like wolves blocking a gate. One grabbed her shoulder. Back off. No autographs. She gasped. I'm not a fan. It's the contract. He dropped it. Another guard pushed her back. Hard. Maya stumbled. The paper slipped from her fingers and landed near Daniel's shoe. He looked down, then up. His eyes were cold, unreadable. He picked up the paper. Maya's voice broke through the air again, softer this time. Don't sign page 8, clause 14. Please, just read it. Daniel frowned. He opened the folder, flipping quickly to the page. His eyes scanned the words. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his lips parted. He turned to his assistant, speaking in Korean too fast for Maya to catch. The assistant's face turned pale. He opened his laptop immediately. Maya stood still, heart pounding. The guards looked confused. Daniel glanced at her again, this time longer. His eyes searched her face. How did you know? Maya's mouth felt dry. She didn't want to say it, but something in his voice wasn't cruel anymore. It was curious. I studied law, she whispered. Harvard. The silence dropped like snow. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. What are you doing serving food in my hotel? Maya's eyes burned. She looked down. Hiding. He didn't speak. Then he said, "You're coming with me." And just like that, the waitress became something else. Not a nobody, not invisible, but the woman who had just saved a kingdom from falling. They sat in the back of the black car. Maya kept her hands on her knees. Her fingers shook, but she tried to hide it. Her eyes watched the city pass by through the window. Buildings tall like towers, neon lights still glowing even though the sun was rising. Daniel didn't say much. He kept checking his phone, his laptop, and his assistant's worried face. Then finally, why Harvard? She looked at him. His tone was lighter now. Curious, not cold. My mom always said, if you want a seat at the table, learn the rules of the game, Maya said softly. So I learned the law. I was good at it. Very good. Daniel leaned back. Then why here? Why a hotel waitress in Seoul? Maya looked out the window again. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. My sister died. I couldn't breathe back home anymore. Everything reminded me of her. I came here to be invisible. Silence filled the car. Not awkward, not heavy, just silence. Like both of them were thinking too much at once. They arrived at a tall glass building, the headquarters of Daniel's company. Maya stepped out hesitantly. She didn't belong in shiny places. She didn't even have good shoes. Inside, everything was marble and silver. She stood like a shadow while Daniel barked instructions, pulling out contracts, pointing at pages. Executives scurried. Some stared at her like she was a stain on the floor. Finally, he turned to her. You were right, he said. If I'd signed that, they'd own everything in 6 months. Maya nodded. Quiet. Calm. I want you to review every contract my team is handling right now, he added. Every single one. She blinked. I'm not licensed in Korea. You're smart. You'll manage. I'll handle the paperwork. Maya stared at him. For the first time in years, something moved in her chest. Something warm. He saw it. He gave a small smile. Don't worry, he said. You saved my empire. Let me help rebuild yours. The room was still. Then Maya nodded. Just once. And a new chapter in her life quietly began. The waitress had stepped out of the shadows, into the light. The next morning, Maya stood in front of a mirror in an office bathroom on the 32nd floor. She barely recognized herself. Her waitress uniform was gone. In its place was a navy blue skirt suit Daniel's assistant had brought in a perfect fit, somehow. Her hair was neatly pinned, and her natural beauty stood out without effort. But it wasn't the clothes that made her look different. It was the fire behind her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked like who she used to be, Maya James, Harvard law graduate, top of her class, fearless debater. Before grief had drowned her, she took a deep breath, opened the door, and walked down the hallway to the legal department. The moment she stepped in, everything stopped. Chairs creaked. Pens dropped. Conversations froze. The legal team, 6 people in suits, mostly men, all Korean, turned and stared. One of them stood up. Miss. Maya, was it? Are you lost? Maya smiled politely. No, I'm here to work. Mr. Lee asked me to join this team and audit every active contract. Laughter rippled across the room. A woman near the back raised her brow. You're a waitress. Maya walked to the whiteboard. Calm, confident. She picked up a marker and wrote, Clause 14, Subownership Conversion Trap. Page 8, Section 2.6, Hidden Buyout Terms. Then she turned around. If any of you had caught that yesterday, none of you would be looking at me like I don't belong here. Silence. One of the men leaned forward. You really found that? She nodded. Yes. And I found 3 more red flags from the other contracts this morning in Daniel's folder. Right then, Daniel walked in. He looked around the room, saw the tension, the frozen faces, the board with Maya's notes. Everyone, he said, meet your new lead advisor. No one said a word. Maya stood taller. Daniel continued, you can either work with her or watch her replace all of you. He turned and walked out. Maya looked around at the stunned faces, and slowly, very slowly, they began to realize. The girl they once ignored, the waitress they laughed at, was now the only thing standing between the company's future and disaster. And she wasn't going anywhere. Later that evening, Maya sat alone in the empty office. Stacks of contracts surrounded her. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. She read fast, flipping pages, highlighting dangerous terms, and writing notes in red ink. She didn't want to make a mistake. Not one. She couldn't afford it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Still working? You need a break. She didn't reply. She didn't know how to talk to someone like him outside of business. Then another message came. Come to the rooftop. She hesitated. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have been. When the doors opened, the cool night breeze touched her face gently. Lights from the city sparkled below like stars had fallen to the ground. Daniel was standing near the edge, hands in his pockets, jacket gone, shirt sleeves rolled up. He turned when he heard her steps. You came. Maya nodded. You said it was urgent. He chuckled. It's not. I just thought. You needed air. She walked slowly to his side. For a while, neither of them spoke. The city below seemed endless. He finally broke the silence. I don't meet many people who impress me. You think I'm impressive? She asked, without looking at him. I think you're brilliant, he said. And brave. Maya's throat tightened. She wasn't used to hearing words like that. Everyone thinks I have it all figured out, he continued. But if you hadn't stopped me yesterday, I'd be bankrupt in less than a year. I owe you. No, Maya said softly. You don't owe me. You gave me back something I lost. What? Purpose. He looked at her then. Really looked. And for a moment, he didn't see the waitress. Or even the lawyer. He saw her. She turned to face him. I don't want to be just a legal cleaner for your messes, she said quietly. I want to build something real. Protect something meaningful. Daniel stepped closer. Then let's build it together. Maya held her breath. There was something in his eyes, respect, admiration, and something deeper, warmer. The silence returned. But this time, it felt like peace. The night wind blew softly through Maya's curls. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was hiding anymore. She felt seen. Truly seen. The next morning, the office felt different. Maya arrived early, her mind buzzing with plans and possibilities. She walked through the glass doors with new confidence, her heels clicking like a heartbeat on the marble floor. Daniel was already there, waiting by the coffee machine, looking sharper than ever in his tailored suit. He smiled as she approached. Morning, Maya. Ready to start changing the game? She nodded. More than ever. Their first task was tough. A pile of contracts bigger than anything Maya had seen, full of traps and loopholes designed to steal power from Daniel's company. But Maya was determined. She worked with the legal team, teaching them how to spot the tricks she had learned in law school. At first, some resisted. They whispered behind her back. How can a waitress know better than us? But slowly, their doubts faded. Maya's knowledge was clear. Her explanations were simple. Her courage was inspiring. Daniel watched it all with growing respect. One afternoon, after a long meeting, he called Maya to his office. Your skills saved us, he said quietly. But there's something more I see. Maya looked up, curious. I see someone who doesn't just fight for contracts, he continued. Someone who fights for people. She smiled, feeling something warm in her chest. They had both started as strangers in this cold city. Now, they were partners in something bigger. And maybe, just maybe, something more. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Inside, Maya knew her story was only beginning. Maya stood by the window, watching the sun dip behind the tall buildings of Seoul. The city lights flickered on, one by one, like tiny promises in the dark. She thought about how far she'd come from a quiet waitress, unseen and unheard, to the trusted legal advisor of one of the richest men in the city. Daniel walked up behind her and gently touched her shoulder. "You changed everything," he said softly. "Not just my contracts, but my view of the world." Maya smiled. "We all have more inside us than people see at first." He nodded. "And sometimes, the people who seem invisible are the strongest of all." They looked out together, not just as boss and advisor, but as two people who had learned to trust and believe in each other. Maya whispered, "It's not about where you start, but where you're brave enough to go." Daniel smiled back, "And who you choose to be on the way." The lights of the city shimmered below, full of endless chances and new beginnings. Maya knew one thing for sure. Her story wasn't about being nobody anymore. It was about being somebody who never gave up. And that was the greatest power of all. If you found this story mesmerizing, please like, share, and subscribe for more amazing tales.